Hi friends, welcome to Beautifully Bookish Bethany. In today's video, we're going to talk about 5 things that I have brainwashed you into thinking are normal as a book influencer. Okay, so the title of this video is a little bit tongue-in-cheek. I recently saw this video by Diaries of Creativity that talks about these different things that she thinks are not normal, that book influencers have brainwashed you all into thinking are normal. And while I don't 100% agree with everything that she said or the way she framed it, I think it's lacking some context, I do think there are bits of truth for it, and I think it's an important thing to talk about. Also, it was very entertaining. I feel like clearly she was being a little more dramatic for the camera for entertainment value, which I get. I do think that these are things that we should talk more about, and it's been a minute since I've talked about them on my channel, so let's discuss. For context, I have been a booktuber for going on 8 years. I have been on Bookstagram for 8 years. It'll be 8 years in June for YouTube. So I've been around a long time, and my normal now is definitely different than my normal when I started. And I think there is a wide range of what that can look like for different people. And while I don't necessarily want to use the word normal because I don't think there is a normal, I do think there is something to be said for what is and isn't typical or average, and what things are probably going to be different for a lot of viewers of book content versus creators of content, because there is a difference, and for a lot of understandable reasons. And she gets into some of this in her video, but I want to elaborate. Thing number 1 is owning a library of books. In some cases, there are people who literally own every book that they have read. That to me is a little wild. I read so many books. I live in a New York apartment. There is no way that I could own every book that I've read, but I do have a pretty significant library. I'll insert some clips here, but this is something that has slowly grown over time. So this is the background you normally see. I've got some pretty collectible classics, collector's editions, and then my yearly TBR. Over here, I've got Book of the Month books, some other special editions, my yearly favorites shelf that gets cleared out in January. This is all like Tor.com stuff for the most part. And then romance books. I have a shelf in my closet with mass market romance books. In the living room, I've got this bookshelf. We've got nonfiction and then sci-fi fantasy, mostly from Orbit and Tor. Shelves around the entertainment center, classics, Cassandra Clare, Sarah J. Maas, my husband's Expanse series, special editions, N.K. Jemisin and Star Wars, comics and graphic novels, Robin Hobb, Susan Dennard, Octavia Butler, and Sylvia Moreno Garcia, and then books from my childhood. Then I have these 2 bookshelves, which are kind of organized by genre and age category. So this is adult fantasy, and then YA, horror, sci-fi, fantasy, more YA fantasy, and then YA like contemporary and mystery thrillers. This is a little bit more of the adult fantasy, but then adult horror, more horror and thrillers, adult sci-fi, mythology, mystery thrillers, lit fic, historical fiction, and then all of this is my unread TBR. Lastly, we have a bookshelf in my children's room. So down here we've got some like picture books and nonfiction and early readers moving into middle grade that is divided up by genre. This is books that I've already read this month, books I want to get to soon or have for projects, and then more of my active TBR, and that's it. I do have a pretty significant library in my house. I've got a lot of bookshelves and a lot of books. Some of them are for my kids. Some of them are things that I collect. This is something that has grown over time. And I don't think you need to have a large home library to be a reader. So growing up, my family did not have very much money. So getting a physical book to own was a treat. I had a bookshelf in my room. I had some books that I owned and treasured and kept for a really long time, but I mostly used my library. I have always been a very avid reader, and as a young person, we would go once every couple weeks. I'd get a big stack of books out from the library, read them all, return them, and get more. And I still love the library. I think it's great. It's an important thing to use. But now I am getting close to 40. I have adult money, and I have books that I have slowly accumulated over a number of years. Some of these are books that I've bought myself, some of them are new, some of them are used, some of them are books that were sent to me from publishers because I've spent almost 8 years working full-time reviewing books and being a content creator. And so I do have a pretty large and nice library, but it didn't happen overnight, and I regularly go through and cull and resell things or give away things that are no longer serving me, things that I don't love, things that I don't plan to revisit, and I do use my library. So while I don't think it's right to say it's not normal to have a large home library, I also think it's not necessary. I think that there are people who at later points in life, because it's something they care about and something they can afford, slowly build a library over time. There are people who can't afford to do that, people who are still too young to have accumulated those books, and there's people where they just don't care that much about owning so many books and they would rather use their money to do other things. And to me, that's really a personal decision. Where do you want it to go? There's people who collect art, people who travel all the time. If we have some money available beyond our basic living expenses, we all make decisions about where to put it. And building a home library over time is not a wrong choice. It's not an abnormal choice, but it is not a choice that everyone needs to make. And it's not a choice you have to make to be a reader. You can own 0 books and just use your library and be just as legitimate a reader as anybody else. So that's my 2 cents on that. Number 2, oh y'all, this is the perennial topic. I have brainwashed you into thinking it's normal to read over 300 books a year. Or have I? This has been my normal for the last several years. I do read a lot and I do read very quickly, and that is not new for me. Like I said, when I was a small child, I would go through a stack of 14, 20 books from the library in 2 weeks and then need to go back and get more. So that is not true of everyone, and you do not have to read at that level to be a legitimate reader. But also it always rubs me the wrong way, the people who have some kind of a feeling about those of us who do read a lot because we read quickly, because we enjoy it, we prioritize it. I could make an updated video, I've done them in the past, but I could make an updated video on how and why I read as much as I do. But really a lot of what it comes down to is, what do you want to spend your time doing? I spend most of my free time reading. I have been a bookish content creator as my full-time job for years. I'm applying for other jobs now, and I expect that my reading will significantly drop once I get a full-time job, but this has been my full-time job, and I read for fun in my leisure time. I watch very little television. I don't have a lot of other hobbies. I like reading, and I read a lot, and I read quickly, and I mean, I don't know what else to tell you. I don't think that it is a more valuable hobby than other hobbies. If you want to spend your time watching TV or playing a sport or whatever it is that you like to do, that's great. And that doesn't make you any less a reader than somebody who does read all the time. And so I think it's one of these things where I do see people feeling insecure because they're like, oh, I only read like 30 books in a year. And I'm like, that's amazing. My husband probably reads like 5 books in a year. And I think that's great. He's still a reader. That doesn't make it any less legitimate, but his main hobby is playing video games, which is fine. My main hobby is reading, so I read a lot more books. And I think for me, the difficult thing about this is that neither of those is normal exactly. Now, the average American reads 1 to 2 books a year. So if you're reading more than that, you're a reader and you're doing good. But at the same time, in order to feel okay about reading being only one of many priorities in your leisure time, you don't have to drag people who choose to do things differently. Does that make sense? I hope that helps. So while I love reading and I love reading a lot and I do a lot of it and I review a lot of books on my channel, and I'm also a stats nerd, so I do talk about the numbers of books that I've read because for me it's fun, I don't feel like anybody else should feel the need to do that as well, or that you need to do what I'm doing in order to be a reader. My hope as a reviewer is that I can actually make it easier for you to not waste your time on books that won't serve you. To me, the ideal situation is that you find a reviewer that you trust and you can listen to their reviews of books and decide, okay, that sounds like something I would like. That sounds like something I wouldn't like. And it can help weed out books that you might have otherwise spent time and money picking up and then not ended up enjoying. And instead help you narrow in on books that you have a higher likelihood of really loving. So in my mind, that's my job. It's very similar to people who review movies. They watch a lot of movies all the time. I don't feel bad because I watch way less movies than a movie reviewer because that's what they do. That's their job. And hopefully them reviewing the movies will help me not waste my time watching something that I'm gonna hate and helps me pick something that I will like. It's kind of the same thing with somebody who is a book reviewer, book influencer, and this gets messy because not all book influencers are really reviewers, but at least for me, I am a reviewer, and so that's how I see it. Thing number 3, I've brainwashed you into thinking it's normal to collect multiple editions of books. Okay, listen. One thing that I think is a really important distinction here is that book reading and book collecting are 2 different hobbies. They can coexist, but they do not have to. I am a reader and a collector. So there are books that I collect special editions of. I am very picky though about which books I collect multiple editions of, but some of my favorites I do have multiple editions of. Can this become excessive? Are there people who maybe need to like take a hard look at their spending and collecting and decide if it is serving them? Yeah, absolutely. But I wouldn't dismiss the validity of book collecting as a hobby. I also would say that you do not have to be a collector to be a reader. If you don't care about collecting, about the value of special editions, about having pristine or signed editions, then yeah, of course, have the copy that you read and annotate and tab up. For me, if there's something that I want to annotate, I'm probably gonna have a reading copy and then like maybe a fancier copy if it's a book that I love and want multiple editions of. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but I also feel like it can get excessive when it's like 5 different editions of this book coming out and I'm gonna buy every single one of them. But also, you do you. If there is a book coming out and that is your favorite book, your favorite author, and you want all the editions of the things, listen, go for it. If that's what you want to do, you do that. And the thing too that I think is important when we're talking about this, we're going to talk more about this in another point, but when we're talking about issues like overconsumption, it is, especially when we're talking about books, a complicated topic because the ecosystem of books also includes the authors who are the artists creating the books, who deserve to be paid a living wage, right? And so while I absolutely love libraries, I love used books, use those if and when you can. If you're able to afford to buy new copies of books and it's something you want to do, you know, there is some benefit to that because it is financially supporting the authors who are writing those books and allows them to continue to do art as their job. So I think it does get a little bit complicated, and to be fair, they still make money if you buy the ebook or the audiobook. So if you don't want to consume lots of physical copies of books, there are other ways, if you're able to afford to do so, that you can financially support them. But also, libraries have to buy copies, so don't let anybody tell you that you are not financially supporting an author by using your library, because you are. Really, the only way that an author is not making any money is when you're doing a used bookstore, but I'm also not opposed to that. I like used books and I don't have a problem with them, but I think it is complicated because there's more to this ecosystem than just the bookstores and the readers. There's also the people making the art, right? So I think that is the piece that sometimes gets left out of this conversation, and it's a nuance that I think we should talk more about. Also, if you want to see a video about my collector's editions of books and the things that I do collect, we could talk about it. I will say the series that I've probably spent the most money on is N.K. Jemison's Broken Earth trilogy, because it is my all-time favorite fantasy series. I love it so, so much. And yeah, I also have like several special editions of Sylvia Moreno Garcia's books because I really love her. I've got multiple editions of The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss because it's also one of my all-time favorites. So I am very particular about which books I collect, but I do have some collections. And I think that's fine, but I also think it is true that you do not have to have or like or want beautiful special editions of books in order to be a legitimate reader and be able to be a content creator. I don't think both of those things have to go together, but sometimes they do. The fourth thing that I have brainwashed you into thinking is normal is having lots of bookish merch. Okay, I'll be honest, this is the one that I sort of agree with the most because I do think it can get really excessive. When I was first starting out in this community, everything was so new and exciting and I felt like I had a reason to buy a lot of books, which we're going to talk more about that later. But I also was like, oh my god, all these book boxes, all this book merch, this is so fun. And I was getting some things for free and I was buying some things. But it quickly reached a point where I was like, okay, I have enough. I've got to stop. I could not keep adding things to my life. It did get to be kind of a lot. I have a whole little round container that is full of bookmarks that I've gotten over the years, and I love them. They're useful, but I don't need to go buy more. I have so many bookish candles. In the height of my Bookstagram days, I was buying a lot of these, and I like them, but they take me forever to go through. I just don't use them often enough. And I, at some point, was like, okay, I think I have enough for a very long time and I haven't bought them in a while. I like them. They're great. I have so many. I do like wearable merch. T-shirts are hit and miss for me, but like nerdy purses, they're not all bookish, I'll be honest. There are also other sorts of fandom things and those are fun, or like mini backpacks. My husband has gotten me a couple as gifts, but I don't go overboard and I don't buy them all the time. So I think it's fine to want some bookish merch. I think it's fun. I think some of it is useful. And if it serves you, great. I do think for me, it got to be a little excessive where I needed to take a step back from it. And I'm really happy with the things that I have now, but I don't need to keep getting more. Bookish mugs. I have lots of great bookish mugs. They make a real cute display, but I was like, okay, if I add more, it's too many. So, you know, whatever serves you, I don't think it's a normal or abnormal thing. I think it's okay to like merch and geek out about it. I think that's fine. It's also fine if you don't like it. If you want a more clean aesthetic, if you don't like clutter, if you don't want a lot of things, then don't get them. I think that's also okay. I also have a lot of tote bags, but I use them. So I don't usually buy them. I typically get them for free at events that I go to. So I don't know. This one I feel like is kind of valid. I think it can get to be a lot. And to be honest, I think a lot of book boxes figured that out too, because there's a lot of them now that offer book only options for people who are like, listen, I don't need all of this stuff. And it's also part of why when I've done boxes, because I've made a couple of bookish holiday boxes for the last couple of years, and I generally try to include mostly things that are consumable items or really useful items, other than bookmarks, but they don't take up a lot of space and I do think they're still useful. So I think there is something to be said for doing less knickknacks and more things that are functional or actually consumable. There is definitely something to that. The final thing that I, as a bookish influencer, have brainwashed you into thinking is normal is book hauls. Let's talk about book hauls. Now, I think it's interesting because over the past year, I've moved away from doing full-on book haul videos on my channel. I've done them a couple times here and there, and it's ironic that I'm making this video now because I'm about to do a book haul video, mostly because I've gotten a lot of things from publishers and small businesses that I want to share that I think are useful to be aware of. Now, what I do agree with is, for the most part, going out and buying like 10, 12, 13 books all at once can be a bit much, unless it's because you've been saving up and waiting for a sale, and now that there's a sale, you're going to get the things that were on your list, right? I think that that's fine, but I do think there's a point at which it can be too much. And I've participated in this. When I first started BookTube, I was so excited to have an excuse to buy books because it was something that I didn't always let myself do. I think growing up in a family that didn't have the money for things like books, I'm sure there is something to me wanting to own more books now that has to do with my lack of resources in my childhood. Probably something to that. But I'll admit, when I started out, I was buying a lot of books, and more books than I was gonna be reading. So I would get used books at the Strand, which is a local indie bookstore that has new and used books. I, at the time, was shopping at Book Outlet, and they would have super cheap books, and I would get these big boxes of books from them, stuff like that. And for me, that was too much. It was overconsumption. And I feel like over the years, I've sort of figured that out and moderated it, where now I don't buy that many books, especially in comparison with how many books that I actually read. Now, what it is a lot of things that are sent to me for review from publishers. And so when I'm doing a book haul, there'll be a handful of things that I've perhaps purchased myself. Some of them are even books that I read as an ARC, as an ebook, or had an ARC of and want to own a finished copy of for my library. Sometimes it's that, but I'm a lot more picky about what I purchase for myself now than I used to be. But publishers send me stuff, and I don't think that it is a typical thing for the average person to be bringing in this number of books in a month or in a set period of time. I think that that is absolutely true. And I do think that it's important to realize that for people like me who've been around a while, that we're on publishers' mailing lists, we are not buying the majority of the books that we are hauling. Now, if you are ethical about this, you should be disclosing legally, you should be disclosing anything that is sent to you for review or gifted to you from a publisher. I always disclose which things are gifted to me and which things I purchase. I do think that that is an important thing. Are there people who are maybe not disclosing it? Possibly. That is possible. It is illegal, so like you're really not supposed to do that. But in an ideal world, people should be disclosing which things they purchased and which things they didn't. I think that's an important thing to note. But, you know, I'm lucky enough to live in New York City, which is near publishers. I get invited to events. I have slowly gotten onto a lot of publishers' mailing lists, so I get a lot of book mail from them. I go to New York Comic Con every year, and I get a lot of books there. I usually do a book haul from that. Most of those are free. I'll buy like several books while I'm there, but most of them are things that are giveaways for free. And I do think that it is worth talking about, are we reading the books that we're bringing in? Not to say that you need to feel like you're reading every single book you buy right away. I don't think that that's realistic, but this is part of why I started tracking the number of books that I am purchasing physically and what things I'm reading. This is part of why I have a spreadsheet that tracks all of my ARCs, my advanced reader copies, and I have it color-coded by which things I actively requested and which things were sent to me without being solicited. And I try to, in a timely manner, make sure that I'm at least getting to the things that I requested. And if there are things that I was sent unsolicited, I decide how I want to tackle them, and often will at least give them a try, even if I end up DNFing some of them. And then maybe some of those books get gifted, if they're ARCs, if they're finished copies. There's a lot of things I don't keep that I list on my Pango bookshelf as I'm moving things out of my space, just because I don't have room for everything that I read. So that is how I approach it. I think it can be a tough balance to strike. And I do think that when you first start out in this community, there can be this real desire, and some of it is understandable. Some of it is just because we love books and it's fun and exciting to buy stuff that you're like, oh, hey, I have an excuse to go buy a bunch of books now. Like, there can be that. But I do think over time, for a lot of people, and honestly, like most of my friends who I know who have been doing this as long as I have also over the years moderated their purchasing. So I think some of it is just time and experience and figuring out what works for you, what makes sense for your budget, what makes sense for your home, and some of it is trial and error. And so as much as, yeah, I agree that overconsumption can be a problem, I think it is a complicated situation when we're talking about books, but also it's good to keep in the back of your mind that when you're looking at book hauls from influencers, probably there's a lot of things that are being sent for free from publishers. These are things to be aware of and things to talk about. And really, as the original creator of this video said, this is true across niches, right? Beauty influencers are sent a ton of free makeup that would cost thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars if they were to purchase it all for themselves. I know because I like makeup and I do buy it, but it's very expensive and no way could I ever have the collections that they have. But that's one of the perks. They're gifted it as PR because part of their job is to try things out and recommend things to people who might be interested in buying it. And it's the same thing with books, right? Publishers send me things because they hope that I might read it, review it, hopefully best case scenario, like it and recommend it to my audience. And that's, you know, part of the capitalist system that we live in. And, I end up with a lot of ARCs. I do not keep the majority of them. I donate some to little free libraries near me. I give them away to friends or patrons and try to make sure that they find a home in the world so that I'm not just, having a bunch of waste. But yeah, I think those are important things to talk about. So again, the title of this is a little tongue-in-cheek, but it's not because I'm upset with the original creator or anything. I think that she has some good things to say, and these are conversations that we should be having. But as somebody who's been a book influencer for a really long time, I wanted to hop into the conversation, and I hope that this helps. I hope that this gives you a little bit of perspective on what it's like behind the scenes, how I approach things, and everybody's going to be a little bit different. But talk to me in the comments down below. Let me know any of your thoughts on this video, on these topics. 2 ways to interact with this. Let's say draw me a book or shopping bag emoji in the comments down below if you made it to this point in the video. Or for a question of the day, let me know how you approach book buying and bookish buying. What do your habits of consumption look like? Do you feel good about where they are? Has that changed over the course of your life? Because I do think it changes, when we're young, when we're older, when we're stressed, when we're not. These are things that have a bit of an ebb and flow to them, and I think that's okay too. So let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. If you like this video, it always helps if you give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you want to see more. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.